The wind howled through Abiquiu like a vengeful spirit, carrying dust and whispers of a man who'd arrived under the cover of darkness 3 nights prior. Samuel Porter stood at the edge of town, his silhouette harsh against the New Mexico sunrise, eyes as cold as a mountain winter and twice as unforgiving. The locals had taken one look at his scarred face and the way his hand never strayed far from his Colt, and decided to give him a wide berth. Katherine Adams clutched her shawl tighter as she hurried across the main street, avoiding eye contact with the stranger who leaned against the post outside the general store. The February morning was bitter, unusual for Abiquiu, which typically enjoyed milder winters than the territories further north. But this year, 1876 had brought an unexpected cold snap that had the townsfolk huddling close to their fires. As the schoolteacher, Katherine was respected in town, but that didn't stop the whispers that followed her, a 23-year-old unmarried woman teaching the children while her father drank away what little money they had. Today, she was running late, having spent the morning chopping extra wood for the schoolhouse stove. "Mornin', madam," the stranger's voice cut through the wind, deep and surprisingly gentle despite his fearsome appearance. Katherine startled, nearly dropping her basket of books. "Good morning," she replied curtly, quickening her pace. "You'll need more than those thin walls to keep your students warm today," he called after her. "Storm's coming." She paused, turning to face him. His face was half hidden by a worn leather hat, but she could see the scar running from his left eye to the corner of his mouth, creating a permanent sneer on one side of his face. Despite this, his eyes were a striking blue, like summer skies that seemed out of place in his weathered face. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Porter, Samuel Porter." He straightened, and she realized how tall he was, towering over most men in town. "But folks just call me Sam." "Well, Mr. Porter, I assure you we'll manage." Katherine turned to leave, but his next word stopped her. "Not if your chimney's in the state I think it is. Saw smoke backing up yesterday afternoon. You'll poison those children with bad air before the day's out." Katherine's cheeks flushed. The school board had been ignoring her requests for repairs for months. "And I suppose you know how to fix chimneys." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Among other things." Before she could respond, Sheriff Taylor approached, his hand resting on his holster. "Everything all right here, Miss Adams?" "Yes, Sheriff, just exchanging pleasantries." The sheriff eyed Samuel suspiciously. "Porter, I told you yesterday, folks around here are jumpy after what happened in Santa Fe. A man with your reputation would do well to keep to himself." Samuel's face hardened, the momentary warmth Katherine had glimpsed vanishing like morning dew under a harsh sun. "Don't recall breaking any laws by saying good morning. See it stays that way." The sheriff tipped his hat to Katherine before walking away, his posture tense. Katherine couldn't help her curiosity. "Your reputation," Samuel's gaze was direct, unflinching. "People talk. Most times they don't know what they're talking about." He pushed off from the post. "You'd best get to your students, Miss Adams, and mind that chimney." Throughout the morning, Katherine found her thoughts drifting to the mysterious Samuel Porter. The children were restless, the cold making them irritable. Little Timothy Jenkins kept coughing, and the smoke that occasionally billowed back into the room wasn't helping. By noon, snow had begun to fall, and Katherine made the decision to send the children home early. As the last student departed, she wrapped herself in her thickest shawl and prepared to brave the increasing storm. Opening the door, she was startled to find Samuel Porter standing on the steps, snow dusting his broad shoulders. "Mr. Porter, what are you doing here?" "Came to fix that chimney." He hefted a toolbox she hadn't noticed. "Can't have the town's children freezing or choking on smoke." Katherine hesitated. Allowing an unknown man, especially one the sheriff clearly distrusted, into the schoolhouse alone could damage her reputation. But the thought of returning to a smoke-filled room tomorrow was equally daunting. The school board hasn't approved any repairs. Not asking for payment. He stood patiently in the snow, waiting for her decision. After a moment's deliberation, Katherine stepped aside. "Very well, thank you." Samuel worked silently and efficiently, clearing the blocked chimney and reinforcing the crumbling mortar. Katherine kept her distance, grading papers at her desk, but couldn't help stealing glances at him. Despite his intimidating presence, there was a precision to his movements that spoke of careful restraint rather than the violence his reputation suggested. "You've done this before," she observed when he finally descended from the roof, his face smudged with soot. "Worked as a mason's apprentice before the war." He wiped his hands on a rag. "It'll hold now. The war, you fought for the Union," a shadow crossed his face. "Started with the Union. Finished with no one." He gathered his tools. Fire should draw proper now. As he moved toward the door, Katherine felt compelled to offer something in return. "Mr. Porter, would you care for some coffee? It's the least I can offer for your help." Samuel paused, his hand on the doorknob. "Don't need payment. It's not payment, it's gratitude." Katherine moved to the small stove in the corner where she kept a pot for her midday meal. "And it's bitter cold out there." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded once. Katherine busied herself preparing the coffee, aware of his eyes on her back. When she turned to hand him the steaming cup, she found him examining the children's artwork hung on the walls. "You teach them more than just letters and figures," he observed, gesturing to a colorful depiction of what appeared to be the local landscape. "Children need beauty in their lives as much as they need knowledge." Katherine handed him the cup, careful not to let their fingers touch. "Art gives them a way to express what they might not have words for yet." Samuel took a sip of the coffee, his expression softening slightly. "You care about them, the children." "Of course I do. Every one of them has potential, regardless of where they come from or what others might think of them." She sat at her desk, cradling her own cup. "Even the ones the town has given up on." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps. "Town's made up its mind about me already. What did you do, Mr. Porter, to earn such wariness?" He set down his cup, the gentle clink against the wooden desk at odds with his imposing figure. "Survived when better men didn't." The answer hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken history. Katherine wanted to press further but sensed the walls around him, high and impenetrable. "Well, I appreciate what you did today. The children will be much more comfortable tomorrow." Samuel finished his coffee in silence, then stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "Storm's setting in. You shouldn't walk home alone." "I've managed worse." "Not offering out of doubt, madam. Just common sense." Katherine considered his offer. The snow was falling heavily now, the wind driving it sideways. Her father wouldn't miss her for hours yet, lost as he would be in a bottle of whiskey. "Very well, Mr. Porter. I would appreciate the escort." They walked side by side through the deepening snow, Samuel shortening his stride to match hers. The few townsfolk braving the weather crossed to the opposite side of the street at the sight of him, their suspicious glances unmistakable. "They fear you," Katherine observed quietly. "Good reason to." His voice was flat. "Fear keeps people safe. Does it? Or does it just keep them isolated?" Samuel didn't answer, but she felt his gaze on her profile. They reached her small house at the edge of town, where a thin trail of smoke suggested her father had at least managed to light a fire before succumbing to his daily stupor. "Thank you, Mr. Porter." He nodded, turning to leave, but Katherine impulsively reached out, her hand hovering just short of touching his arm. "Will you be staying in Abiquiu long?" Samuel looked down at her hand, then up at her face. For a moment the mask slipped, and she glimpsed something vulnerable beneath. "Hadn't planned on it, but plans change." With that cryptic response, he disappeared into the swirling snow, leaving Katherine with more questions than answers about the mysterious man who had shown unexpected kindness, despite his fearsome reputation. Over the next few days, the blizzard intensified, trapping most of Abiquiu's residents in their homes. Katherine used the time to catch up on reading and to care for her father during his increasingly rare moments of sobriety. On the third day, when the storm finally broke, she ventured into town for supplies. The general store was crowded with people restocking after the weather-imposed isolation. Katherine waited patiently in line, listening to the conversations around her. "Shot 3 men in Tucson, they say. Cold as ice about it. I heard it was 5 in Dodge City. Didn't even blink. My cousin knows a fella who rode with him after the war. Says he's killed more men than Winters killed cattle. What's he doing in Abiquiu? Nothing worth stealing here." Katherine recognized they were talking about Samuel Porter. The stories seemed fantastical, growing more outlandish with each retelling. She thought of his careful hands repairing the chimney, the way he'd shortened his stride to match hers in the snow. Could this be the same man they described as a remorseless killer? "He fixed the schoolhouse chimney," she found herself saying, drawing surprised looks from those around her. "Mr. Porter. He noticed it was damaged and repaired it, free of charge." The storekeeper, Mr. Bell, snorted. "Probably casing the place, seeing what's worth taking." "There's nothing of value in the schoolhouse except the children's futures," Katherine replied sharply. "And he did a fine job of the repairs. That doesn't sound like a man just passing through looking for trouble." "Miss Adams, Mrs. Holloway," one of the school board members, spoke with forced patience. "We appreciate your dedication to seeing the good in people, but men like Samuel Porter don't change their ways. Sheriff Taylor received a telegram from Santa Fe yesterday. Porter's wanted for questioning in connection with 2 deaths there last month." Katherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lingering cold. Questioning isn't the same as guilt. "No decent man has that many stories following him," Mr. Bell insisted. "Best you keep your distance, Miss Adams. Your reputation's delicate enough with that father of yours." Katherine's cheeks burned at the reference to her father's public failings, but she held her head high as she collected her purchases and left. Outside, she nearly collided with Samuel himself, who stood just beyond the store's entrance. The look on his face told her he'd heard every word. "Mr. Porter, no need to defend me, Miss Adams." His voice was low, controlled. "People will believe what they want. Is it true?" "About Santa Fe," his jaw tightened. "Was there when 2 men died. Didn't pull the trigger." He studied her face, seemingly searching for something. "Would it matter if I had?" The question hung between them, challenging her professed belief in seeing the good in everyone. Katherine considered her answer carefully. "It would depend on the circumstances, I suppose. Sometimes violence finds us whether we seek it or not." Samuel's expression shifted subtly, something like surprise flickering across his features before the mask of indifference returned. "You should listen to the good people of Abiquiu, Miss Adams. Keep your distance. And if I prefer to make my own judgments," a humorless smile touched his lips, "then you're either braver or more foolish than most." Before she could respond, a commotion from the end of the street drew their attention. A wagon had overturned, pinning the driver beneath it. Without hesitation, Samuel dropped his own supplies and ran toward the accident, Katherine following close behind. The driver, Mr. Davidson, was trapped under the wagon's edge, his face contorted in pain. Several men were already attempting to lift the heavy vehicle, but it barely budged. "Get back," Samuel ordered, his voice carrying such natural authority that the men instinctively obeyed. He assessed the situation quickly, then positioned himself at the crucial point. "Need 3 men here," he indicated spots along the wagon's side. "Lift on my count, and you," he nodded to Katherine, "help pull him free once we've got it up." Under Samuel's direction, they coordinated their efforts. When he gave the signal, the men heaved upward, muscles straining. Samuel bore the brunt of the weight, his face revealing the enormous effort as the wagon lifted just enough for Katherine to help Mr. Davidson slide free. As soon as the man was clear, Samuel eased the wagon back down, controlling its descent to prevent further damage. The crowd that had gathered watched in stunned silence as this man they feared knelt beside the injured farmer, examining his leg with surprising gentleness. "Broken, but clean," Samuel announced. "He'll need it set." Dr. Morris pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside them. "I'll take it from here, Porter." Samuel stood, stepping back as others moved in to help transport Mr. Davidson to the doctor's office. As the excitement died down, the townsfolk began to disperse, but not before casting curious glances at the man who had taken charge so efficiently. Katherine approached him, noticing how he flexed his right shoulder as if it pained him. "You're hurt. Old injury. Acts up sometimes." He dismissed her concern. "Your purchases are scattered all over the street." They walked back to where he dropped his supplies, Katherine collecting her own items that had spilled from her basket. She noticed he'd purchased surprisingly domestic goods: coffee, flour, a new shirt. "You're settling in, then?" she asked, gesturing to his supplies. Samuel hesitated before answering. "Rented the old Wilkins place outside town, for now." The Wilkins farm had been abandoned for over a year after the family moved to California. It was small but solid, with good water access and decent grazing land. "That's more than a temporary arrangement," he shrugged. "Winter's no time to be traveling, come spring." He left the thought unfinished. Katherine wanted to ask more, to understand what had brought this complicated man to their small town and what kept him there despite the hostile reception. Instead, she said, "You were impressive just now. Not everyone would know how to handle such a situation. Seen my share of accidents." He gathered his supplies, and men trapped under things heavier than wagons. During the war, a nod was his only response. After a moment, he asked, "Your school open tomorrow?" "Yes. The children have missed enough days already." "Good. Education matters." Something like approval flashed in his eyes. "You should get those supplies home, Miss Adams. Your father will be waiting." The mention of her father brought reality crashing back. "Yes, I should go." She hesitated. "Thank you again for the chimney. The schoolroom has been much warmer." Samuel tipped his hat slightly. "Good day, Miss Adams." As February gave way to March, Katherine found herself looking for Samuel Porter whenever she went into town. Sometimes she spotted him doing odd jobs fixing Mrs. Hernandez's roof, helping the blacksmith with a particularly difficult horseshoeing, or simply sitting alone outside the saloon, watching the town with those observant blue eyes. The residents of Abiquiu began to adjust to his presence, moving from outright fear to cautious acceptance. His actions, always helpful, never threatening, gradually softened their wariness, though most still kept their distance. Katherine, however, found herself increasingly drawn to the enigmatic man. They would exchange brief greetings when their paths crossed, sometimes sharing a few minutes of conversation. She learned he was 32, had fought at Shiloh and Gettysburg, and could read better than most men she knew. She'd caught him with a dog-eared copy of the Iliad once, which had led to a surprisingly passionate discussion about literature. What remained a mystery was his past between the war's end in 1865 and his arrival in Abiquiu. Those 11 years were a void he refused to fill with details, despite her careful questions. One afternoon in mid-March, as Catherine dismissed her students, she was surprised to find Samuel waiting outside, leaning against a pine tree at the edge of the schoolyard. The children filed past him with curious glances, but no longer ran in fear as they had when he first arrived. "Mr. Porter." "What brings you here today?" He straightened, hat in hand. "Wondering if you might want to see the progress at the Wilkins place. Made some improvements." Catherine blinked in surprise at what amounted to an invitation. "Aye, that would be pleasant, but I need to prepare tomorrow's lessons." "Another time, then." He began to put his hat back on, disappointment evident despite his effort to hide it. "Wait," Catherine found herself saying. "Perhaps I could come on Saturday. In the afternoon." The corner of his mouth twitched upward, not quite a smile but close. "Saturday would be fine." As he turned to leave, Catherine called after him, "Mr. Porter." "Why ask me?" He looked back, considering his answer carefully. "Because you look at me and see a man, not a ghost story." Saturday arrived clear and mild, the New Mexico sun warming the earth after the harsh winter. Catherine told her father she was visiting a student's family to discuss their progress, knowing he wouldn't question her or remember she'd gone once the whiskey took hold. She wore her best day dress, a soft blue calico with minimal trimmings, and braided her hair more carefully than usual. As she approached the Wilkins place on the gentle mare she'd borrowed from Mr. Bell, she chided herself for her nervousness. This wasn't a social call in the traditional sense. Samuel Porter wasn't courting her. He was simply a lonely man seeking company from the one person in town who treated him with basic humanity. The transformation of the property was immediately apparent. The previously overgrown yard had been cleared, the broken fence mended, and the peeling paint on the small house refreshed to a clean white. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, and as Catherine dismounted, she noticed new curtains in the windows. Samuel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance as well, wearing a clean shirt with his hair neatly combed, though nothing could soften the scar on his face or the weathered lines around his eyes. "Miss Adams," he greeted her, the formality at odds with the pleased expression he couldn't quite hide. "Glad you came. The place looks wonderful," she said sincerely. "You've worked miracles in just a few weeks." Pride flickered across his features. "Come inside, made coffee." The interior was as transformed as the exterior. The simple furniture had been repaired and polished, the floors swept clean. A bookshelf stood against one wall, sparsely populated but with quality volumes. Catherine recognized Dickens, Homer, and what appeared to be a collection of Shakespeare. "You've made it a real home," she observed, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. Samuel shrugged. "Never had much, don't need much. But you need this," she gestured to the books. "A life of the mind." He sat across from her at the small table. "Reading keeps me sane, keeps me connected." "To what?" His eyes met hers, intense and unexpectedly vulnerable. "To the man I was before the war, before everything after." It was the most personal statement he'd made to her, an admission that something of the feared gunman was a construct, a shell around a different core. Catherine set down her cup. "Who were you before Samuel?" The use of his first name hung in the air between them, an intimacy neither had broached until now. "Son of a schoolteacher," he said softly. "In Pennsylvania. Mother taught me to read before I could ride. Father was a cabinet maker. Had plans to follow him in the trade. Then the war came." He traced a finger along a groove in the wooden table. "You know what war does to men." "I've seen its aftermath in my father," Catherine acknowledged. "He came back changed, found comfort in the bottle instead of with my mother and me." "Some wounds don't show," Samuel's voice was quiet. "After I drifted, found I was good with a gun, better than most, made a name for myself in ways I'm not proud of. The stories people tell about you. Some true, some exaggerated, done things I can't undo." His gaze was steady. "But I never killed for pleasure or profit, only ever in defense of myself or others who couldn't defend themselves." Katherine believed him, though she couldn't have explained why. Perhaps it was the way his hands, capable of violence, moved with such careful precision whether fixing a chimney or pouring coffee. Perhaps it was the respect he showed her students, or the books that revealed a thoughtful mind behind the fearsome exterior. "What brought you to Abiquiu?" she asked. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, tired of drifting, of being the man people feared, thought maybe in a small place far enough from my reputation I could start again. A humorless smile touched his lips. "Reputation followed me anyway, but you stayed. Found reasons to." His eyes held hers, and Katherine felt warmth rise to her cheeks at what remained unspoken. The afternoon passed in conversation that flowed more easily than either had expected. Samuel showed her the improvements he'd made to the house and the small garden he'd started planning for spring planting. As the sun began to lower, he walked her to her horse. "I've enjoyed today," Katherine said, suddenly shy as he helped her mount. "As have I." He adjusted her stirrup, his hand lingering near her ankle. "Perhaps you might visit again. Or you could join us for Sunday services," she suggested impulsively. "It might help the town see you differently." Samuel stepped back, his expression closing. "Don't think that's wise. Church and men like me don't mix well. The church is for everyone, especially those seeking redemption." His laugh was short and bitter. "Redemption requires forgiveness. Some things can't be forgiven, Katherine." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and despite the darkness of his words, she felt a thrill at the sound of it on his lips. "I believe otherwise," she said softly. "But I won't press you." As she turned her horse toward town, Samuel called after her, "Saturday next. I'll have the garden marked out by then." Katherine smiled over her shoulder. Saturday next. The following week saw a subtle shift in their relationship. Their Saturday meetings became a regular occurrence, sometimes at the Wilkins farm, sometimes riding together across the New Mexico landscape. Katherine found herself living for these afternoons, when Samuel would gradually reveal more pieces of himself, like a puzzle slowly taking form. In town, attitudes toward Samuel continued to evolve. When flash floods threatened several farms in early April, it was Samuel who organized the men to reinforce the riverbanks. When 10-year-old Billy Harper went missing during a spring thunderstorm, Samuel led the search party that found him sheltering in a cave. Each crisis revealed more of his leadership abilities and practical skills, earning grudging respect if not yet friendship from the townsfolk. Katherine's father, during a rare moment of sobriety, noticed her preoccupation. "You've been spending time with that Porter fellow," he stated one evening as she prepared their simple dinner. Katherine tensed. "Yes, he's not what people say." Gerald Adams stared into his empty glass, his hands trembling slightly from the need for whiskey. "Men earn reputations for a reason, Katie. Your mother would be worried." "Mother would have judged him by his actions here, not rumors from his past," Katherine countered, though the mention of her mother, 5 years deceased, still stung her father's side. "Maybe so. She always saw the best in people, like you." He pushed himself up from the table, reaching for his coat. "Just be careful. Even a changed man carries his history with him." As he headed for the door, inevitably bound for the saloon, Katherine called after him, "Do you think people can truly change, Father?" Gerald paused, his hand on the doorknob. "I hope so, Katie. God knows I've tried and failed enough times." With that sobering admission, he left, the door closing softly behind him, the question lingered in Catherine's mind as spring fully established itself in Abiquiu. Samuel's farm flourished under his careful attention, vegetable rows sprouting green promise, a few chickens clucking in a newly built coop. He'd even acquired a milk cow and 2 horses, all signs of a man putting down roots. Yet he still kept mostly to himself, venturing into town only when necessary, declining invitations to social gatherings, and steadfastly refusing to attend church despite Catherine's gentle encouragement. The wall around him had thinned in her presence but remained firmly in place for others. In late April, disaster struck the school when a kitchen fire in the attached teachers' quarters, unused since Katherine lived with her father, spread rapidly. The children were safely evacuated, but the building suffered significant damage before the bucket brigade could extinguish the flames. The school board met the following day, with Katherine in attendance. The verdict was grim. Repairs would cost more than the town could afford before fall, leaving the children without formal education for months. "Perhaps we could hold classes in the church," Katherine suggested desperately. "Just until repairs can begin," Mr. Holloway shook his head. "Pastor needs the space for services and meetings. Besides, we'd still need funds for the repairs eventually. What about a fundraising effort, a community event to raise the money?" Katherine looked around the table seeking support. Mrs. Bell sighed. "In spring, when everyone's stretched thin after the hard winter, I don't see how we'd raise enough." Katherine left the meeting disheartened, walking slowly through town with her mind racing through possibilities. She was so preoccupied that she nearly walked into Samuel, who was loading supplies into his wagon outside the general store. "Heard about the school," he said by way of greeting. "Children all right?" "Yes, thankfully, but the building." She shook her head, fighting back tears of frustration. "The board says we can't afford repairs until fall at the earliest." Samuel studied her face, then glanced toward the damaged schoolhouse visible at the end of the street. "Let me see the damage." They walked together to the school, Samuel assessing the charred walls and collapsed roof section with a professional eye. "Structure's still sound," he pronounced after a thorough inspection. "Need new roofing, replacement for this wall section, fresh plaster, paint." He turned to Katherine. "Materials would cost, but labor's the bigger expense." "Which we can't afford," she said miserably. Samuel was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Could do the work myself, have the skills." Katherine stared at him in disbelief. "That's incredibly generous, but even with just materials, the cost I've saved. Don't spend much." He shrugged as if offering to rebuild half a school was a minor gesture. "Education matters." "Samuel, I can't ask you to, not asking, offering." His blue eyes held hers steadily. "Those children need their school. You need your purpose." Impulsively, Katherine reached out, taking his hand in both of hers. "Thank you, but I'll only accept if you let me help, and if you'll let me convince others to join in as well." His fingers tightened around hers briefly before he withdrew his hand. "Community effort would be better, faster. Then we'll make it one." The next day, Katherine approached the school board with Samuel's offer. Their initial skepticism gave way to cautious acceptance when faced with the alternative of leaving the children without education. Samuel drew up detailed plans and a materials list, impressing them with his knowledge of construction. Word spread quickly through Abiquiu. While some still harbored reservations about Samuel, the prospect of rebuilding the school galvanized the community. Farmers offered lumber from their woodlots. Women organized a series of bake sales to raise additional funds, and men volunteered their labor on days they could spare from their own work. Samuel oversaw it all with quiet competence, teaching inexperienced volunteers, solving problems as they arose, and working longer hours than anyone else. Katherine watched as the town's perception of him gradually shifted from fear to respect, if not yet complete acceptance. She spent every spare moment at the construction site, helping where she could and continuing lessons with the children in the shade of a large oak tree nearby. Often, she would look up to find Samuel watching her teach, a strange expression on his face, something like longing mixed with pride. One evening in early May, as they were the last two remaining at the site, Katherine brought Samuel a cup of water from the barrel kept for the workers. He sat on a stack of lumber, reviewing his plans by the fading light. "You've accomplished a miracle," she said, sitting beside him. "The school will be better than before." Samuel accepted the water gratefully, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms dusted with sawdust. "Community did it. I just provided direction. A community that wouldn't have come together without your initiative." Katherine brushed sawdust from her skirt. "They're seeing you differently now, seeing what I can do, not who I am." He set the cup down. "There's a difference." "I disagree. What we do reveals who we are far more accurately than what we say or what others say about us." She turned to face him fully. "You've shown them a man who cares about children's futures, who works harder than anyone else, who has skills and knowledge he's willing to share freely. That is who you are, Samuel." His expression softened, the perpetual guardedness fading. "Is that how you see me?" "I see all of that and more." Katherine's heart pounded as she continued. "I see a man haunted by his past but fighting for a different future, a man of intelligence and principle, a man I've come to care for deeply." Samuel went still, his eyes searching her face as if looking for any sign of insincerity. "Katherine," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips, "you don't know everything I've done. I know enough." She reached out, her fingers lightly touching the scar on his face. "I know enough to be certain of what I feel." For a moment, it seemed he might pull away. Then, with infinite gentleness, Samuel caught her hand and pressed it more firmly against his cheek. "I don't deserve your regard. Deserve has nothing to do with it. The heart chooses what it chooses." In the lengthening shadows of evening, with the scent of fresh cut wood around them and the sound of distant birdsong, Samuel leaned forward and kissed her tentatively at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. His hands remained respectfully at his sides until Katherine moved closer, her own hands finding his shoulders. When they finally parted, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "Been wanting to do that since the day you defended me in front of the general store." Katherine smiled. "I've been waiting for you to do it since you fixed my chimney." A rumble of laughter escaped him, perhaps the first genuine laugh she'd heard from him. "Should have acted sooner." "We have time now," she whispered, and was rewarded with another kiss, deeper than the first. They were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Separating quickly, they turned to see Sheriff Taylor watching them with a troubled expression. "Miss Adams," the sheriff nodded curtly. "Porter." Katherine stood, smoothing her skirt. "Sheriff Taylor, we were just finishing for the day." "I can see that." His disapproval was evident. "Your father's looking for you, Miss Adams. In his usual state, I'm afraid." Katherine sighed. Her father's drinking had worsened lately, perhaps in response to her obvious happiness. "I'll go to him. Thank you, Sheriff." As she gathered her things, the sheriff moved closer to Samuel, speaking in a low voice that nonetheless carried to Katherine. "You're doing good work here, Porter. Don't ruin it by compromising a respectable woman's reputation." Samuel's expression hardened. "My intentions toward Miss Adams are honorable. Intentions aren't always enough to overcome a man's nature." The sheriff's hand rested meaningfully on his holster, or his past. Katherine rejoined them, pretending she hadn't heard. "I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Porter." "Sheriff, would you mind walking me home? It seems my father needs assistance." The sheriff offered his arm, which Katherine took while casting a reassuring glance at Samuel. As they walked away, she felt Samuel's eyes following them and wondered if the sheriff's warning would push him away just as they'd finally found each other. The school reconstruction continued through May, with Samuel maintaining a respectful distance from Katherine in public following the sheriff's intervention. But their private moments stolen at the end of workdays or during her Saturday visits to his farm grew increasingly intimate, though always within the bounds of propriety. By early June, the school was nearly complete, far sooner than anyone had anticipated. The community's involvement had transformed the project from a necessity to a source of pride, with additional improvements beyond the fire damage repairs. Samuel had designed a better ventilation system for the stove, built sturdy new desks, and even added a small lending library corner with shelves he'd crafted himself. The town's attitude toward him had undergone a similar transformation. While not everyone embraced him fully, most had moved beyond fear to acceptance, some even to genuine appreciation. He was invited to share meals, included in conversations, and treated as a contributor to the community rather than a threat to it. Katherine's heart swelled with pride at this evolution, even as she worried about what would happen when the school was finished. Would Samuel remain in Abiquiu without the project tying him to the town? Had their relationship progressed enough to anchor him here? Her father, surprisingly, had become an unexpected ally. One evening, after witnessing Samuel helping a drunken Gerald Adams home and treating him with dignity rather than disgust, the older man had given his gruff approval. "He's a better man than his reputation," Gerald had admitted, temporarily sober and clear-eyed. "And he looks at you the way a man should look at the woman he loves." The observation had sent a thrill through Katherine. Samuel had never spoken of love, though his actions increasingly suggested it. She herself had realized weeks ago that what she felt had deepened beyond attraction or admiration to something profound and enduring. 2 days before the scheduled reopening of the school, Katherine arrived at the building to find Samuel alone inside, installing the last of the glass panes in the new windows. "It's beautiful," she said, taking in the transformed space. Sunlight streamed through the clean windows, illuminating freshly plastered walls, the polished wooden floor, and the rows of new desks awaiting the children's return. Samuel turned, a rare smile lighting his face when he saw her. "It'll serve well, because of you." Katherine moved closer, noting the changes in him over these months of labor. His face had tanned from working outdoors, the perpetual tension in his shoulders had eased, and while the scar remained, it no longer seemed to define him. "Because of us," he corrected, setting down his tools. "You gave me a reason to do it, to stay." Katherine's heart quickened. "And now that it's finished, will you still stay?" Samuel took her hands in his expression serious. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether what's between us is enough." He took a deep breath. "I'm not the man I was when I came to Abiquiu. Not anymore. Working alongside these people, seeing how a community can function when people care for each other, it's changed me." "You've changed me." Katherine squeezed his hands. "You changed yourself, Samuel. I just believed you could. And now I believe it too." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing something small. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." When he opened his palm, a simple gold band gleamed in the sunlight. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "Only thing of hers I kept through everything. Never thought I'd have a reason to use it until I met you." Katherine's breath caught as Samuel knelt before her, still holding her hand. "Katherine Adams, I came to Abiquiu a man frozen by his past, feared for the coldness I showed the world. You saw through that to the man underneath. You taught me warmth again, how to give it and how to receive it." His voice, usually so controlled, trembled slightly. "I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Catherine's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she managed, "Yes, Samuel. Yes, I will marry you." His smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger was transformative, years falling away from his features as joy replaced the habitual guardedness. Standing, he gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of exuberance before kissing her thoroughly. When they finally separated, both breathless, Katherine rested her hands against his chest. "When?" "Soon as you wish. I've made the farm ready for a family." "Our family." The word family sent a warm flutter through Catherine's stomach. After the school reopening, she decided, let's share our news with everyone then. The school's official reopening was planned as a community celebration, with a picnic and speeches to follow the children's first day back. Katherine spent the morning in a state of barely contained excitement, both for her students' return to their improved building and for the announcement she and Samuel would make afterward. The children were delighted with their new classroom, exclaiming over the improvements and treating Samuel, who had quietly taken a seat at the back to observe, with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Katherine noticed how his expression softened when interacting with the younger students, revealing a gentleness she treasured. As the school day concluded, the community gathered outside for the celebration. Tables laden with food stretched across the schoolyard, and nearly everyone in Abiquiu had come to mark the occasion. Katherine stood with Samuel slightly apart from the crowd, her father beside them, as the mayor prepared to make a speech. "Today," the mayor began, "we celebrate not just the reopening of our school but the spirit of community that made it possible. When disaster struck, we came together. Many contributed, but none more than Samuel Porter, whose expertise, labor, and generosity were the foundation of this achievement." A murmur of agreement passed through the crowd, with several people nodding appreciatively toward Samuel. "Mr. Porter," the mayor continued, "Abiquiu owes you a debt of gratitude. You've proven yourself a valuable member of our community, and we're fortunate to have you among us." Samuel, uncomfortable with the attention but standing tall, nodded in acknowledgement. The work itself was reward enough. "Seeing the children back in their school is all the thanks I need," the mayor smiled. "Nevertheless, we insist on expressing our appreciation." He gestured to Mrs. Holloway, who stepped forward with a framed document. "The school board has voted unanimously to name the new library corner the Porter Reading Room in recognition of your contributions." Katherine squeezed Samuel's hand as he accepted the framed certificate with genuine surprise. "Thank you," he said simply. "Education changed my life once. Hope it does the same for these children." The mayor was about to continue when a commotion at the edge of the gathering interrupted him. A group of horsemen had ridden into town and were approaching the schoolyard. At their head was a man Katherine didn't recognize, but beside him rode a face she did know, the U.S. Marshal from Santa Fe who occasionally passed through Abiquiu on official business. Samuel tensed beside her, his body going rigid as the riders drew closer. The crowd parted nervously, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere. "That's far enough," Sheriff Taylor stepped forward, hand resting on his holster. "State your business, gentlemen. We're in the middle of a celebration here." The lead rider, a hard-faced man with a carefully groomed mustache, scanned the crowd until his gaze settled on Samuel. "Our business is with him. Samuel Porter, also known as Cold Sam in parts of Kansas and Missouri." A ripple of unease passed through the gathered townspeople at the confirmation of at least part of the rumors surrounding Samuel. Katherine tightened her grip on his hand, feeling his pulse racing. "What's your interest in Mr. Porter?" the sheriff asked, moving to stand partially between the riders and Samuel. The U.S. Marshal spoke up. "We're here on official business, Sheriff." "Mr. Carlton here," he nodded to the lead rider, "has information connecting Porter to the deaths of his brother and another man in Santa Fe this past winter." "Murders," Carlton corrected harshly. "Cold-blooded murders." Samuel's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd, steady despite the tension evident in his posture. "Not murders, self-defense." "That's for a judge to decide," the marshal replied. "We need you to come with us to Santa Fe, Porter." Katherine felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. She looked up at Samuel, searching his face for reassurance, for any indication that this was a misunderstanding that could be quickly resolved. What she saw chilled her. The warmth she'd grown accustomed to had vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold calculation she'd glimpsed only in fragments before. This was the man the stories spoke of, the gunfighter who had survived when others hadn't. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "What's happening?" He turned to her, and for a moment the mask slipped, revealing anguish beneath. "I told you there were things in my past," he said quietly, "things I couldn't outrun." "Did you kill those men?" she asked directly, needing to hear the truth from him. "Yes." No hesitation, no excuse. "They drew on me first. Carlton's brother had a grudge from years back, found me in Santa Fe, brought a friend. Both were drunk, both armed. I tried to walk away. He gunned them down in the street," Carlton spat. "Shot my brother in the back when he was walking away." "That's a lie." Samuel's voice remained level despite the accusation. "Your brother turned to fire again after I'd wounded him. Ask any witness." The marshal raised a hand to silence Carlton. "That's why we're taking you in, Porter, to sort through the conflicting accounts properly. If it was self-defense, as you claim, you'll have your day in court to prove it." Katherine felt her father's hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "Is this true, Porter?" Gerald Adams asked. "You killed those men." "Yes, sir, but not as Carlton claims." Samuel's gaze returned to Katherine, and the pain there was unmistakable. "I wanted to tell you everything, kept waiting for the right time." Sheriff Taylor stepped closer. "Porter, I think it's best you go peacefully, clear this up legally." Samuel nodded slowly. "I'll go." He turned to face the crowd, many of whom were watching with expressions ranging from shock to disappointment to outright fear. The fear that had greeted him when he first arrived now returned in full force. "I owe you all an explanation," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent schoolyard. "When I came to Abiquiu, I was running from my reputation, not from the law. What happened in Santa Fe was self-defense, as I've said, but before that—" He took a deep breath. "The stories you heard about me aren't all false. I've killed men, some who deserved it, some who might not have if I'd found another way." Katherine watched as the town's hard-won trust in Samuel visibly eroded with each word. Her heart ached for him, for the community, for the future they had planned together that now hung by a thread. "After the war, I became someone I never meant to be," Samuel continued. "A man who solved problems with a gun because it was the only skill that seemed to matter. A man people feared because fear kept them at a distance, and distance felt safer than connection." His gaze found Katherine again. "Until someone showed me another way to live." The marshal dismounted, approaching cautiously. "We need to go now, Porter." Samuel nodded, but before surrendering, he turned fully to Katherine. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice meant for her alone despite the crowd's strained attention. "Everything between us was real, the truest thing in my life." Katherine fought back tears. "How long will you be gone?" "Don't know. Trial could take weeks if they believe it was self-defense." "When?" she corrected firmly. When they believe it, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Even now you have faith in me, always. She reached up to touch his face, not caring who witnessed the gesture. I'll wait for you. Samuel covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his cheek. I don't have the right to ask that. You're not asking, I'm telling you. Katherine straightened her shoulders, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. I love Samuel Porter. I've agreed to be his wife. Whatever happened before he came to Abiquiu, I know the man he is now, the man who rebuilt our school, who taught our children about honor through his actions, who brought this community together. The marshal cleared his throat awkwardly. Miss, I appreciate your feelings, but we need to proceed. Katherine nodded, stepping back reluctantly. Samuel removed his gun belt without being asked, handing it to Sheriff Taylor. Keep it for me, he asked quietly. The sheriff accepted the weapon with a nod, his expression troubled but not unkind. I'll testify to your character here, Porter. For what it's worth. Worth a great deal, Samuel replied. He turned to Katherine one last time. I love you, he said simply. Then, with dignity that impressed even his accusers, he allowed himself to be taken into custody. Katherine watched as the group rode away, Samuel between the marshal and Carlton. The celebration had dissolved into concerned clusters of townsfolk discussing the dramatic turn of events. She felt her father's arm around her shoulders, providing unexpected support. He'll come back to you, Gerald said with surprising conviction. A man doesn't find love like that only to lose it. Some people won't accept him even if he's cleared, Katherine said, watching the reactions around them. Her father squeezed her shoulder gently. Some won't, but enough will. The school stands as proof of what he can build. Now it's up to him to prove what else he can become. The weeks following Samuel's departure were among the hardest of Katherine's life. She threw herself into her teaching, finding solace in the children's innocent acceptance, and in the reading room Samuel had built, where his presence seemed to linger. News from Santa Fe came sporadically. The trial had been delayed while witnesses were gathered. Carlton had influential friends pressing for the harshest possible outcome. Samuel was being treated fairly but remained in custody. Katherine wrote to him daily, sending packages of books and home-baked goods along with her letters. His replies were less frequent but treasured, awkwardly affectionate at first, then increasingly open as he shared his hopes for their future, and his determination to return to her a free man, worthy of her trust. The town's reaction to their relationship was mixed. Some, like Mrs. Holloway and Dr. Morris, expressed support and belief in Samuel's innocence. Others kept a careful distance from Katherine, as if her association with Samuel tainted her by extension. Her father, to her ongoing surprise, defended both her choice and Samuel himself, even getting into a fistfight at the saloon with a man who'd spoken disparagingly of his future son-in-law. In late July, Katherine received word that the trial would finally begin. Unable to bear the separation any longer, she made arrangements for a substitute teacher and traveled to Santa Fe, accompanied by her father and Sheriff Taylor, who had agreed to testify to Samuel's character. The courtroom was crowded when they arrived, the case having attracted attention throughout the territory. Katherine's heart pounded as Samuel was brought in, thinner than when she'd last seen him but standing tall, his eyes searching the room until they found her. The trial lasted 3 days. Witnesses confirmed that Carlton's brother had indeed initiated the confrontation, that both he and his companion had been armed and threatening, and that Samuel had attempted to walk away multiple times before the shooting. Carlton's claims that his brother had been shot in the back were disproven by the doctor who had examined the bodies. When Samuel himself testified, Katherine held her breath. fearing his past would overshadow the truth of this specific incident. But he spoke with a quiet dignity that impressed even the most skeptical observers, acknowledging his history while firmly maintaining the facts of what had happened that night in Santa Fe. "I've been a violent man," he admitted under cross-examination. "Used my gun more often than I should have. But I never drew first, and I never shot a man who wasn't trying to harm me or someone else." "And now," the prosecutor asked, "are you still that man?" Samuel's gaze found Katherine in the gallery. "No, sir. Found something worth more than my reputation, something worth changing for. If this court sees fit to give me the chance, I intend to become the man Abiquiu believes I can be, the man she knows I am." On the third day, the jury returned their verdict. Not guilty. Self-defense had been clearly established, and despite Carlton's outraged protests, Samuel was free to go. Katherine pushed through the crowd to reach him, uncaring of propriety as she threw her arms around him. Samuel held her tightly, burying his face in her hair as if drawing strength from her presence. "It's over," she whispered. "You can come home now." Samuel pulled back slightly, his expression serious. "There's one thing I need to do first." He turned to face Carlton, who stood glowering nearby, his hand hovering near his holster despite the crowded courtroom. "Mr. Carlton," Samuel said evenly, "I'm sorry about your brother, truly. But this ends here. I won't be looking over my shoulder for you, and you won't find me if you come looking." "You think a jury decision changes anything?" Carlton snarled. "You're still a killer." "I was," Samuel acknowledged. "Not anymore." He extended his hand, an offer of peace that shocked everyone present. "Let it be finished between us." Carlton stared at the outstretched hand with contempt before turning away without taking it. "This isn't over, Porter." Samuel let his hand fall but remained calm. "For me, it is. I've found something better than vengeance." He turned back to Katherine, taking her hand in his. "I've found a future." They returned to Abiquiu 3 days later, the journey filled with plans for their wedding and their life together. Katherine was surprised to find a small delegation waiting at the edge of town to welcome them, her students, several parents, and members of the school board. "We heard the news," Mrs. Holloway said, stepping forward. "We're glad justice was done, Mr. Porter." Samuel nodded, clearly moved by the welcome. "Appreciate that, and your trust." Not everyone in town was as accepting, of course. Some families kept their distance, watching with wary eyes as Samuel settled back into life in Abiquiu. But enough people had seen his true character during the school rebuilding to give him the chance he needed. Katherine and Samuel were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony in the newly completed schoolhouse, with her father walking her down the aisle and most of the town in attendance. Sheriff Taylor stood as Samuel's best man, a gesture of reconciliation that symbolized the community's cautious acceptance. As they spoke their vows, Katherine saw tears in Samuel's eyes, perhaps the first he'd shed in many years. "I promise to keep teaching you warmth," she whispered as she slipped a ring onto his finger, "for all our days." "And I promise to be worthy of your lessons," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Their life together began on the farm. Samuel had prepared with such hope the home that would expand over the years to accommodate the family they created together. Katherine continued teaching, while Samuel's skills as a builder and his growing reputation for fair dealing led to a successful business constructing homes and businesses throughout the territory. The coldness that had defined him gave way completely to the warmth Katherine had glimpsed beneath his protective shell. Though he never forgot the man he had been, Samuel Porter became known not for his deadly skill with a gun, but for his steady hands that built rather than destroyed, and for his quiet generosity toward those in need. Years later, when their children asked about how they met, Samuel would smile at Katherine and say, "Your mother saw something in me no one else could see. She taught me that warmth isn't just something you feel, it's something you choose to create." Katherine would take his hand, the scar on his face softened by time and happiness, and add, "And your father taught me that sometimes the coldest exterior hides the warmest heart if you're brave enough to look beyond what others fear." By the time their grandchildren played in the yard of the home Samuel had built with his own hands, few in Abiquiu remembered the fearsome gunfighter who had ridden into town that cold February day. Instead, they knew the respected builder, dedicated family man, and stalwart community member who had proven that a man's past need not determine his future, that with love and courage, anyone could learn warmth, even in the coldest of hearts. On their 25th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the New Mexico sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Samuel turned to his wife, the lines around his eyes now from laughter rather than hardship. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Taking a chance on a man everyone feared," Katherine smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Not for a single moment. Some people search their whole lives for the kind of love we've built, Samuel. I knew what I'd found the day you opened your coat and said you'd teach me warmth." Samuel chuckled, wrapping his arm around her. "Think you have that backward. You were the teacher, I was the student." "Perhaps," Katherine replied, watching as their youngest granddaughter chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. "The best lessons are the ones we learn together." As darkness settled over Abiquiu, the Porter home glowed with warmth and light, a beacon built not just of wood and stone but of redemption and love, proof that even the coldest heart could learn to burn bright when given the chance to change.